Day 51, 5 RHOD, 998. The Fane of Tyomat. 8:30 AM. Before we started, we fixed some level-up related discrepancies. Leica was missing her level 11 maneuver and skill points. Kikini likewise fixed up the Crystal she got after taking the Crystal affinity feat that she was supposed to have gotten at LV10. While we weren't able to meet for about a month due to various problems plus my graduate studies, I polled the players and asked which of the doors they wanted to open. The previous session they had stopped in the Fane's foyer and wondered which of the 3 doors they should open. Center the double doors leading to the main corridor 1. Before opening the doors, Holden leans over to them to listen. He didn't even have to make a check, the doors were vibrating rhythmically, in time to the sound of heavy metallic footsteps. Pum. 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 I told you we should have gone through the left. Nox volunteers to peek. He pulls the iron door ajar and spies the source of the noise, a 12-foot-tall metal monstrosity with a stylized draconic head and claws the size of great swords patrolling the corridor. It was simply walking repeatedly up and down the hall. He reports this to Linny, who identifies it as an iron golem, obviously fashioned by dragons or dragon-related creatures. The party debates a bit on what to do, then finally agrees to let Nox scout first as the golem moves to the far end of the Fane. Before anything else, Linny buffs Holden with Bull's strength. The sniper barely gets into the doorway when what looks like another Tyomat chandelier hanging 40 feet down the hall flares to life and rotates its black dragon head toward Nox and unleashes a beam of crackling black necro energy. He barely dodges the spell, which Linny identifies as enervation. At this point, the golem turns on its heel and begins walking toward the party. While they're terrified of the spell turret, they figure that dealing with the implacable construct and the trap now will save them a lot of headaches later. Kikini gets into Shinik focus while Linny, knowing her magic is useless against the golem, attempts to shatter the spell turret with Sound Lance. A valiant effort, but it simply doesn't deal enough damage to destroy it. Holden and Leica charge the golem, striking it hard. However, only Holden's maul seems to do anything. As mighty as Leica's Vonangan is, it barely makes a scratch on the iron plating. The mighty construct lashes out at Holden with its claws, shaving off about half his HP in one round. It's only his steely resolve damage pool that prevents this from really messing him up. Shocked at how powerful the Guardian is, the party begins thinking twice. The spell turret turns to its blue dragon head and unleashes an orb of electricity on Holden. It doesn't deal as much damage as the one that had killed him previously did, but it still gives him a nasty zap. Nox runs back into the foyer. Kikini, feeling completely useless, uses Shinik Fly from the Horn of Abathriox to allow Nox to reach the killer chandelier. Leica and Holden keep up their assault. Leica leaps into the air and drives her blade into the golem using Soaring Raptor Strike. Despite the force of the blow, she ultimately doesn't deal enough damage to significantly hurt the golem. Despite the density of her Baishk sword, it isn't hard enough to crack the dense armor plate. Holden pulls Elder Mountain Hammer and cracks the golem in the groin, shattering some of the plating and chainmail cowling there, but the machine keeps moving, shanking Leica and Holden each for upwards of 20 damage. 6 feet of cold steel tend to do that to an adventurer's body. Linny uses her last wand of magic missile charge to shoot the deadly furniture, but only succeeds in chipping the finishing. The machine continues menacing the 2 frontliners. Meanwhile, Nox flies up to the trap and attempts to disarm it. He fails spectacularly, however. The machine turns to its green dragon head and blasts Nox, Leica, and Holden with confusion. All of them make it their saves and breathe a huge sigh of relief when I tell them what the spell was. At this point, Kikini's player asks me how big the spell turret is. I tell them it was just about the size of the chandelier in my living room, about 1.5 feet in diameter. The players then ask if it's possible to cover the trap with cloth. I rule that doing so would block its line of sight and thus cause it to stop firing. Nox comes up with the solution, a tent pulled from the survival pouch. As hilarious as the idea was, I assured them that it would work as long as they securely fastened the tent to the ceiling using pitons. Kikini attempts to slow down the golem by dropping Shinik grease around it, but the golem amazingly makes its reflex save. It continues shredding Holden, who is by now in the red. He tries using Revitalizing Strike, but his strike skids off the construct's armor. Leica uses Death from Above, gashing the golem's chest plate. Understandably, the golem turns on her and slices her up. Linny rushes to Holden's aid to heal him, while Nox succeeds in covering up the spell turret from his floating position and hangs onto one of the necks by his legs as he starts driving in pitons. The golem, however, has other plans. The dragon head opens up and blasts Leica, Holden, and Linny with toxic gas. All of them make their saves, though Holden has to reroll his with Zealous Surge. Not through with them, the golem wailed into the dwarf again, dropping him to dangerously low HP. Holden drops a final Divine Surge on the golem, busting a huge hole in its chest. Said hole allows Leica easy access to the golem's innards, which she promptly destroys. The machine goes into a seizure, babbling random words in Draconic, and finally shuts down. Nox finishes nailing the canvas into place. The other players wonder how guards would react if they saw a tent nailed to the ceiling, so someone came up with the brilliant suggestion of writing, out of order, in Infernal. However, we agreed that such a phrase was not characteristically fiendish, so Linny wrote, "This pathetic machine is useless," instead. Kikini levels up from the encounter, so she picks 2 new powers, Shnik Disintegrate and Retrieve. We break for lunch. The party continues planning their next move. Nox obsessively goes over all of the doors, making sure none of them are trapped, and the party enters what used to be the kitchen. I threw that out because I figured the crack element wasn't as funny as the writers thought it was, and it assumed the players were going to have to leave with the night hag. As such, I replaced it with a plush bedroom where one of Azarkul's Raxhosses stayed. They entered the room and saw that there the furnishings were predominantly red, green, and gold, colors that are appealing to the eyes of fiends. They also saw that the table still had food on it, bread, cheese, and raw, bloody meat. Whoever had been occupying the room had left in a hurry. Nox opened a door to the side, a closet. It was filled with a wardrobe of wildly varying outfits and styles: peasant clothes, scholars' outfits, aristocratic attire, for both genders and for various body shapes. It was easy to guess that whoever lived in this room was a shape-a-changer, either a changeling, or, more likely, a Raxhossa. Finding nothing of interest no matter where they looked, they continued looking around. They were so paranoid that they didn't want to open the door leading out the other side, to the point that Kikini of all people got up and went through the side passage and opened it just to prove that there wasn't much to be afraid of. The party then went out the other door and into the corridor, then tried out the door to the cleric quarters, checking for traps all the way, of course. Inside the cleric's quarters, they saw that all of the 10 cells were identical: bed, cabinet, shrine to Tyomat. At the far end of the room, across it from the entrance, there was another door. This one I had added. The door was barred, chained, and padlocked. Holden tried to listen once more, while Kikini and Linny said about defacing the small Tyomat shrines. Before long, they heard the telltale sound of a switch being pulled. An enormous, purple mass of slime came falling out of a trapdoor in the ceiling. The ooze was so big that it couldn't really even fit in the room's narrow passages, but it could squeeze through them just fine. Linny identified it as a mind abolisher, a living weapon created by the giants of Zendrike to fight Quarry. It was kind of like a Shnik black hole, sucking in Shnik power points while being immune to almost any magic. This is an anti-Shnik version of the arcane ooze in MM3. Holden and Leica immediately began beating on the blob, while Nox, Kikini and Linny tried to stay as far from they could. Before Kikini could do anything, her already paltry power point total took a massive hit of 13 pp. Since the ooze needed line of effect to her to drain pp, Linny advised her to hide in one of the cells first. However, this wasn't the only threat. Someone had pulled the switch. A bolt of energy shoots out of nowhere, striking Holden. He took 2 strength damage from the shot. It had come from a cleric of Tyomat on the other side of the room from the ooze. Half the party then felt their minds being assailed, though they made their saves. It was another cleric of Tyomat who had cast confusion on them. The 2 clerics, properly Doom-Hand Confessors, had been invisible and were hiding in the farthest cells until the party, and now they had the party trapped between them and the ooze. Leica and Holden dealt significant damage to the ooze, which languidly lashed out at them but failed. The ooze then began crawling away and back up the far wall of the chamber. Fearing that it would climb across the ceiling and fall on them, they decided to get the hell out from under it and began beating the 2 clerics instead. As soon as Leica begins attacking the clerics, they realize that she's holding the sword of Wormlord Karn. "Why are you holding Vonangan, defilers?" "That's Wormlord Karn's sword." "We killed him," remarks Leica nonchalantly. The clerics simply look at each other in disbelief. They continue missing with their flails, despite them channeling their debuff spells into their attacks and repeatedly using smite. Leica takes a few swipes at the clerics, feeding her sword with some of their blood. Nox is trapped too close to the clerics to use his crossbow, so he instead draws a dagger out of his gauntlet of infinite blades and begins throwing them at point-blank range, rather ineffectually. One of the clerics successfully bashes Nox with his smite attack and yells, "Our training is better than your pitiful human training. It's what allowed us to kill so many of your men at Brindal." Holden says, "Well, our training allowed us to kill your dragon. And how did you get past Tirgarun?" "We had a rough time with him," says Linny. "Well, I had a rough time with his wife," says Holden. Leica gives him a sidelong glance and pauses. "So you did sleep with a hobgoblin? Shut up and keep fighting." Linny tries backing away from the clerics, but the ooze stops going up the wall and instead crawls back toward Linny and smacks her hard, swallowing her. "Ugh. The acid. My skin." The ooze constricts Linny, bringing her very close to death, so Holden does his best to rush back and save Linny by activating her belt of healing. He then executes a full power attack on the ooze, knowing he can't possibly miss, plus Divine Surge. Despite the massive 72 damage that does, the ooze was still intact. Leica rushes in, finishing it off with a soaring raptor strike and activating Von and Gan. The ooze explodes. With the ooze dead, Kikini steps out of her hiding place and Shinik greases the clerics, causing them to slip and fall. Leica and Holden then begin conversing with Linny, completely ignoring the clerics. "Hey. We're still alive." As Kikini and Nox wear the clerics down, rather slowly and ineffectually due to the primary attackers trying to save Linny, the clerics begin spouting slightly nonsensical lines thanks to the pinpricks of Kikini's Dorhi and Nox's dagger. "How dare you enter the temple of Tyomat and defile our sacred shrines? And now you torture us. This is just revenge for trying to siphon my Shinik power," Kikini says. She points at Holden and his beard, and her, pointing to Linny, skin. "Thanks to your people, I died, and now my beard has no body." Recall that Holden's beard had a permanent feather fall effect on it. Linny screams "my skin," and casts deific vengeance on one of the clerics. Since Orion is the god of knowledge, I rule that the spell fills the target's mind with unfathomable knowledge and incomprehensible math calculations. "Ah! Trigonometry! Algebra," the confessor cries, as he crumples to the ground. He drops to 0 HP and is disabled. The other looks down at his disabled partner and says, "I'm going to keep fighting for as long as I live," which is admittedly not going to be a very long time. Leica tumbles past him into the alcove he was standing beside, stands up, grins, and cuts him down. The disabled cleric, his mind still in agony, says, "You're never going to stop Azar Kul," and cuts himself across the throat with his finger while casting Inflict Light Wounds. He collapses onto the floor and bleeds to death. Linny divests them of their scrolls. Holden finds the key to the padlocks on the barred door and listens again. Nothing. He cracks the door open. The sight inside is breathtaking, a large room with a ceiling over 70 feet high, and glorious stained glass windows decorating the far end. The windows depict scenes of demons fighting dragons, as well as scenes of Tyomat being imprisoned. A huge rose window depicting the 5 heads of Tyomat fettered around the necks with thick chains inscribed within a pentagram dominates the upper portions of the wall. In the middle of the room is a 15 x 15 foot dais, upon which rests a large Kyber dragon's heart the size of a human. It's obviously cracked, and a purple mist seeps out of the crack. The room is filled with an unnatural chill. Linny recalls that Kyber dragons' hearts are often used in the imprisonment of elementals and outsiders. In front of the dais, in pieces on the floor, is what would have been a magnificent marble statue of a dragon. The PCs ask what kind of dragon it is, but I tell them it's unlike any of the typical dragons. After a few history, lore, and knowledge checks, they're able to determine that this was a statue of none other than Bahamut, and that from the markings on the dais, the statue used to be on top of it and that the shard was a recent addition. As such, the players begin thinking that this chapel was actually the prison of Tyomat. I quickly tell them that Tyomat is the most powerful of the demon overlords, and that to imprison her would take a Kyber dragon's heart the size of a city, and that her prison is actually in Argonnissen, in the Pit of 5 Sorrows. Holden asks if Bahamut was a good god, and after he learns that he is one, he goes forward and drops a few sprinkles of silver powder on the shattered statue. Then the shard speaks. "I sense that someone has entered my domain," says a calm, slightly sleepy-sounding voice. The voice itself seems pleasant enough, but while listening to it, everyone notices that the voice seems to have a background sound laughter. The laughter of children at first, then lapsing into psychotic laughter, and back. The PCs are stunned. You have the smell of blood on you. Hobgoblin blood, did you enjoy slaughtering the clerics guarding this door? I enjoy doing good, says Holden. We only did what had to be done, offers Leica. Ah, I see. Replies the voice. My senses seem to have grown dull, it is only because of their haphazard imprisonment of me that I can actually sense and converse with you. Maybe it's about time I got out. Linny asks, what can you tell us about this place? This, dear friends, is part of the system that powers Tyomat's prison. The PCs look at each other in stunned silence. The hobgoblins you slew are interlopers who have dealt with the original guardians of this complex. How did they get past the guards? Asks Holden. Isn't it obvious, my friend? They had a dragon with them. Whoever was living here was slaughtered rather unceremoniously. They are quite powerful. They also lack a basic knowledge of hygiene, remarks the dwarf. How does one even live here without a bathroom? That's what they use the ooze for, replies the voice. A collective groan from the group, and a shriek from Linny. Ew. I was in that thing. I feel for you, my dear, says the voice. Anyway, Holden says, getting back on topic. Why are you here? How did this happen to you? The cold high priest, Aslancross, is planning to disrupt the prison of Tyomat by pulling the plane of Shaveroth into coterminous with the material plane. I assume you've encountered some of the bait he's employing as you entered this complex. Yes. Those were the fiends he summoned to work for him as the boundaries between the planes weakened. So why aren't you working for him, prods Holden? I didn't want to. He couldn't make me bow to his will, so he imprisoned me. In any case, if you could set me free I could offer you a deal that might help you. How exactly do we set you free? Holden asks suspiciously. It's simple. My prison is failing. Shatter the shard and I will be free. Who are you? What are you? I have many names. Replies the voice. Such as. Linny interrupts the exchange and whispers into Holden's ear. I think it's a demon. A powerful one at that. I don't think Aslancross would have imprisoned it here if he could bend it to his will. Names are not important right now, says the voice. What are you, then? I am a free agent. I specialize in making deals. More suspicious than ever, Holden asks. Whose side are you on, anyway? I am on my own side. But again, I offer you a simple way of defeating everyone here and accomplishing your quest. A simple favor in exchange for another. What proof do you have of everything you've told us? Seek out Aslancross's council room. Since he has sent out his army, it has fallen into disuse. I assume that if you're here, you've already defeated them. Am I correct? Yes. And what of the lesser wormlords? They're all dead. Then the room will indeed be mostly abandoned. It's a simple matter of getting in. You will find the room off to the side of the main hallway. It's behind the double doors. The party then leaves the shard, conferring along the way. Holden and Linny are mostly convinced that freeing the voice is not really a good idea. Aslancross wouldn't have imprisoned it if it were something he could control. Nox also agrees that it might not be a good idea to make yet another deal. They've made too many as it is. Kikini alone says that she feels rather sorry for it and suggests that setting it free might not be as bad an idea as it seems. The party arrives at the council room door. Nox finds no traps on the door. Holden peeks inside. The room is completely dark, but thanks to his dark vision he's able to make out the details inside. A large table dominates the center of the room. 8 large, cushioned chairs surround the table. The chair at the far end has a much taller back and is ornately carved in Tyomat motifs. However, beside this, tucked in a corner, is another, much larger throne big enough to seat a creature at least as big as an ogre. The party enters. They puzzle over the giant chair, wondering if that belongs to Aslancross. However, they have no reason to believe that the cult leader is of a larger size than usual. Nox once more searches for traps and immediately detects a trap on the Tyomat carved chair likely triggered to go off if anyone sits in it. The party gives it a wide berth. Holden suggests that maybe the council room is fake, but they realize that the table is covered in documents, books, journals, and most importantly a map almost as big as the table, pinned in place by daggers. Spoiler. Show. Linny immediately sets about deciphering the map. The circle of draconic runes reads, by the power of the planes is Tyomat bound. The 5 symbols are the sigils that represent the planes of Eberron. Clockwise from top. Mabar, the endless night, a realm that devours the life of anyone who enters. Fernia, the sea of fire, a nightmarish firestorm in which the most powerful of fire elementals, demons, and devils dwell. Risiya, the plain of ice, a frozen, barren land of permanent winter. Lamania, the twilight forest, a land of nature unleashed and unbound, unfettered by any civilization. Shavaroth, the battleground, the plain that Azarkul is pulling out of its orbit, a land of eternal war, the ultimate clash between law and chaos, evil and good. I leave the players to draw their conclusions at first, and they do get the picture. This is the seal that binds Tyomat, a magical prison so vast that it overlaps with 3 continents. After Linny schemes through the books, she realizes that an important one is a treatise on demon overlord imprisonment, which says that the Kyber dragon's heart that contains Tyomat is so vast that it can only be held stable by the power of the orbits of 5 planes. The movement of the planes around the material plane acts like a magical circuit, making an arcane current flow through the seal to sustain it. Each of the 5 points of the seal is a focal point for one of the 5 planes, a fane. 2 of the points are deep underwater, the Dragon Reach Fane and an unnamed Benthic Fane in the sea between the continents of Argonnissen and Zendrike. A third fane is located deep in the jungles of Zendrike, near the mouth of the mighty Hydra River. The fourth, labeled the Elser Fane, is the very building they are in. Turns out it's not a temple to Tyomat after all, but a relay station for the seal, and the final fane is Tyomat's prison itself, the pit of 5 sorrows deep in the heart of Argonnissen, the nation of dragons. The PCs who can read Draconic quickly pore over the other books, until someone finds Azarkul's campaign journal. The notebook contains various objectives, many of them crossed out with red ink. They also spot the names of the Wormlords, all crudely crossed out. The only lines of text that remain unblotted are rather chilling. 5 bar AKAs 998. Began the planar manipulation. Estimated date of completion within 1 month. Might run into problems sustaining power for realignment. The PCs realize that today is 5 RHOD 998, exactly 1 month later. He's been ahead of us all this time. They wonder under their breath if they're too late, but since they aren't swimming in fiends yet, Azarkul might have run into some delays. They have 3 days lead time at most. Exhausted from their day and almost out of spells, they decide to rest. However, Kikini brings up the subject of shattering the dragon's heart once more. She asks Holden what the doctrine of the Silver Flame is regarding outsiders. He recalls that slaying outsiders is priority, and that an imprisoned demon is still a demon out of place on Eberron. We have bigger barrels to booze from at the moment, he says dismissively. The PCs argue a bit over where to sleep. The former Wormlord quarters near the entrance might not be a very good sleeping place, since it requires them to be separate. They then decide to stay inside the large bedroom that belonged to the Rax Hassa. They lock the doors to be sure. Linny flops onto the bed. Kikini sits down and meditates, while Nox leans against the closet door, examining his crossbow. Leica sleeps with her head down on the table, while Holden stays awake, sitting fitfully near Leica. Before they even finish sleeping about 4 hours into their rest, a loud banging sound on the door adjacent to the main corridor wakes them all. "Hey," calls a gruff hobgoblin voice. "Open up. We know you're in there." Nox tries to bluff. "Of course you do. We're guards here. What's taking you so long?" "We're just checking things out." "What's the password?" "There is no password. You've given yourself away, you fool. You sound like a human." "But I'm speaking in Goblin." "You have a human accent." Holden then volunteers to remedy the situation. "Move along. We're just checking things out here. We work together. And you sound like a dwarf." "That's the worst insult I've ever heard." Holden cries with hobgoblin-like indignation. "That's it. I'm coming in." The door continues banging. Nox tries to slip out the other side, but before he even gets into the corridor, an arrow comes whistling out of the darkness and into his leg. Kikini immediately pulls the hamstrung rogue in while Leica bars the door with the table. A softer knock on the door this time, followed by a voice that sounds like a deep, hissing growl. I can smell your blood. I shot your friend. I hope he enjoys his limp." He. Silence. The harsh knock again. "How's the bed?" asks the gruff hobgoblin voice. "Pretty comfy," Linny says. Silence. The shadows cast by the headboard of the bed warp and twist, and a lean, feline figure clad in a dark scarf and chainmail appears, carrying 2 short, Surved swords. The black, panther-like head gives the beast away it's a Rakshasa. Linny identifies it as a Najtharan Rakshasa, a shape-changing fiend adept at infiltration and assassination that usually works for higher-level fiends. However, she doesn't roll high enough to recall any of its weaknesses. Before she can even speak, the Rakshasa stabs her with an envenomed sword, severely injuring her. BGM, the Talons of Sorrow. Get out of the way, Linny, roars Holden. I hate Rakshasas. I'm going to ram this maul down its throat so far it comes out the other end. Oh, I'd like to see you try. It's not going to be easy, definitely not as easy as killing your wife was. The fiend then erupts into psychotic laughter. The Rakshasa is mine. From this point onward, Holden is a frothing bundle of armor-plated anger. He is incoherent and single-minded in his desire to slay the fiend. Kikini immediately fires Ego Whip, trying to conserve her PP, but the fiend's metaphysical barriers stop the power cold. Knowing what she cast on him, the Rakshasa taunts her, "Oh, my fragile ego is so bruised by your assault. How painful, ha! That was pathetic. I know how you took down the dragons. It's not going to work on me." One by one, more devils begin teleporting into the room, first an excruciating spiked chain-toting leather-clad fiend with metal plates bolted over its mouth, then a Barbaza with its giant, saw-toothed glaive. They both teleport onto the bed around the cleric. Damn it. They're going to tear Linny apart. Nox delays to snipe at a creature that gets hit in melee, while Leica sprints onto the bed, whirling Vonangan in a great arc and cutting into the Barbazu and the Excruciarch. Nox shoots the Excruciarch in the head, a massive blow. The fiend pulls out the bolt, shrieking pain. Glorious pain. You might enjoy the work I do, boy. Now Nox wasn't being RPED by his regular player, and this guy's a bit loopy, so Nox was mostly OOC for the entire session. You don't know pain until you've worn a corset. Everyone stops, even the devils, and together they give Nox weird looks. A second Excruciarch and Barbazu pair teleports in, cornering Nox. Linny, however, gingerly steps away before the devil can do anything, and summons the wrath of Orion on the injured Beitja with Devil Blight. The Pain Devil implodes, its soul sent shrieking back to Shaveroth. Holden runs straight for the Rakshasa and tries to crush its head with Elder Mountain Hammer, but the fiend ducks. The adamantine head of his weapon crunches into the wall, sending bits of masonry everywhere. The Rakshasa, whose name was Afrasiab, leaps off the bed, tumbling out of Holden's and Linny's reach, putting the cleric between him and the Barbazu. He then stabs Linny once more, dropping her to dangerously low HP. The fiend twirls his blades and sheaths them behind his back, hands ready on the hilts. Leica identifies this as the assassin's stance, a deadly dirty fighting technique. Kikini turns on the fiends near Nox and blasts them with electric energy missiles, but both make their saves and take very little damage. The Excruciarch unleashes its Hell Scourge, whipping Nox and Kikini, but only succeeds in hitting Nox. He makes his save versus the Surge of Pain, but the Barbazu follows up with a full attack as well, sending Nox down to critical HP. Nox panics and begins weighing his options. Does he heal himself or does he help everyone with Mass Shield of Faith? He decides on helping the party and UMDs his scroll, raising everyone's AC. Leica continues dueling the Barbazu beside her, dealing more and more damage. Linny backs away, casting Light of Venia, filling the room with the pearly glow of the spell. Holden rushes at the Rakshasa once more, but Afrasiab gingerly parries it away. The Crusader, still in a rage, moves into his thicket of blades stance, twirling his maul about. The Rakshasa whips out his blades, striking them together to spark them, and a small fire elemental materializes behind Holden. Holden, distracted by the flare, takes a massive full attack from the assassin. Only 2 of the attacks hit, however. Afrasiab takes a low swing and rips the tendons in the joint of Holden's leg. The painful injury slows him down even more. Kikini blasts the devils again, frying one of the Barbazu but completely failing to hurt Afrasiab, who is simply far too nimble to pin down. Nox is finally able to trigger his healing belt, and takes aim once more at Leica's victims. The other Excruciarch falls, leaving one Barbazu. Afrasiab, however, remains strong. The Rakshasa assassin breaks away from Holden, takes a glancing blow from Holden's AOO, and tumbles past Leica. In one fluid motion, he plunges both his blades into her flesh, severely injuring her. In retaliation, Kikini incinerates the last Barbaza with a powered-up energy missile, knowing that Afrasiab is pretty much immune to her attacks. The Rakshasa dodges low as the missiles fly past him. Nox delays once more, waiting for Leica's opening. Her death from above strike connects, but Nox's dead-eye shot just narrowly misses the Rakshasa, twists his head out of the way as the bolt whistles past. Linny screams as she unleashes her Light of Venya, sending burning shafts of light straight through the fiend's body. "You're going to regret doing that, girl," roars Afrasiab. Holden, meanwhile, limps up to Linny for healing. He's pretty much useless if he can't keep up with the Rakshasa. Afrasiab sheaths his blades and closes his eyes briefly as he steps away. Kikini tries to shoot him one last time, but once more fails to score any significant damage as the assassin dances between her bolts. Nox whips out another scroll bands of steel and fires it off. While Afrasiab manages to dodge the binding effect, the loose coils still entangle him. This time, it's Afrasiab who is slowed down. Leica takes another swing, but she might as well have struck the fiend with a flimsy twig. Linny finally gets around to healing Holden, and he pounds furiously after the dying Rakshasa. His weapon erupts with silver light dancing around the heavy black metal head. "Remember what I swore to do? Well, I'm doing it now." He rams the heavy maul into the fiend's maw. The divine surge of argent fire ravages the fiend's body and it bursts open, charred and smoldering. All throughout the process, Afrasiab screamed and screamed. "Finally," says Holden as he drops to his knees. "Justice." Holden and Linny finally level up now, everyone's at LV11. They also decide to loot and leave the Fane once more to avoid getting cornered. We begin where we left off. The PCs had just avenged Holden's wife by slaying the Rakshasa assassin Afrasiab, and had decided to leave the Fane to recover their daily abilities. They decide to finally try to disable the spell turret, since they figured that someone would remove the covering while they were asleep. They didn't want the trap to slow them down again when they made their way back in. Kikini pulls off a patch from her robe of useful items / a 24-foot ladder and has Nox use this to climb up to the trap. As soon as he pulls off the tent, though, he fails his disable device check. The turret's red dragon head blasts the assassin with Phantasmal Killer. He fails both saves and falls to the floor 20 feet below, quite dead. Hearing the clatter of the falling ladder and the thump of Nox's falling body, Linny runs to his aid and immediately casts Revivify on him. I warn the players that any deaths from now on are seriously difficult to remedy, and that if they get TPK'd, it is a game over. Sobered by the thought of their mortality, the players decide that they've had enough of the Fane for now and that further risking their lives to shut down the turret is pointless. They make a break for it, closing the central door behind them. The PCs run across the bridge and climb back up the far side of the canyon, and rest in the hollow of the crashed Lyrandar airship. They nurse Nox back to working order, and get back in the next day. Day 52. 6th Ron 998 YK. The charnel house. The PCs rush back in, and this time give the main hallway a wide berth. They decide to go for the left door, as they haven't opened that yet. It takes them through a narrow passage with a side storeroom, but after seeing nothing of value in it, they press on and open the door at the other end. When Holden opens the door, a shocking sight greets him. The room is pitch black. In front of the door is a large wooden mess table, with a thick layer of congealed blood smeared across the top. The constant sound of dripping liquid draws his gaze up, where a grisly sight greets him. A young bronze dragon, only about 15 feet long, hangs unceremoniously from meat hooks attached to the ceiling. Its belly is torn open and its entrails hang out, decaying and filling the room with a nauseating stench. Two other dragons of similar size, also bronze, hang from more chains around the room. A huge pile of beds and tables, a barricade of some sort, blocks of almost the entire northern end of the chamber. At that moment, the chains above the PC's heads jangle. Something is hiding there. A chain-shrouded humanoid figure is hanging from the chains. Linny identifies it as a chitin, a chain devil. While it's not immune to fire like Beit-Juar, it's instead immune to cold and uses chains as its primary method of attack. Before they're able to start opening fire on it, though, Legion devils begin teleporting in around Leica and begin attacking her, and once the PCs start thinking that the Legion devils aren't so bad, whatever it is behind the barricade casts a spell on the area, Cloud Kill. Of course, the Legion devils, being Beit-Ju, are immune to the damage. The toxic gas begins taking its toll on the PCs. The chain devil then begins animating the meat hook chains and attacking Linny, but not before she drops Devil Blight on one of the Legion devils. Again, the significant drawback of the Legion devils' bites, Holden smashes a single one with Divine Surge and all of them die. However, there's still the chain devil, which is clinging to the chains 20 feet above the PCs, and whatever it is hiding behind the barricade. Leica attempts to push the pile of furniture down, but fumbles. Linny dispels the cloud kill, but another casting takes its place. By now the PCs are hacking and coughing. Nox, unable to do much damage to the Chain Devil, and not having the requisite anti-regeneration weapons, pulls out a scroll of recitation and buffs the party. Holden tears down part of the barricade, and Linny finally identifies the creature Amet so loath. After I'm done enumerating the long list of resistances and immunities, Kikini decides to trash the rest of the barrier. A huge pile of beds and tables falls onto the Metzoloth, but it quickly picks itself up and dispels their buffs. Leica, Nox, and Holden close in on the fiend while the casters move out of the way of the rolling cloud of toxic gas. Leica's swings don't deal full damage to the Ugoloth due to its DR, but Holden is able to crush it quickly enough. The Chain Devil is left, and its superior reach has already severely injured Linny, who retreats to just outside of the reach of the dancing chains. It attempts to use its unnerving visage on everyone, but they all make their saves. Kikini decides to end it quickly. She asks Holden to drop Kumhakarna's penance, and then throws them all along with Leica at the Chain Devil. Amusingly enough, she crits with the hammer, which melts a large hole in the fiend's side, but misses with the throne shifter. Leica manages to land on the rotting dragon corpse. Nox takes his shot, knocking out the fiend. Leica picks up Holden's maul and crushes the fiend's head. The chitin breaks apart in a mass of rusty, crumbling chains. The PCs realize that there are 2 more doors that lead out of the room. Nox pulls away the bed that's blocking one of them and realizes it opens out into the main corridor. He then decides to open the other door. Nox is unable to see inside, so Kikini hands him one of the dark lights. What he sees inside sends chills down his spine. Standing in the darkness is a 12-foot-tall monstrosity that looks like a horribly distorted skeleton. Its long, distended skull sprouts twisted, antelope-like horns. A pair of shredded wings and a long, bony tail pokes out of the long, leather coat that it wears. In its hands it holds a long glaive that seems to be carved out of bone tipped a saw-toothed blade that emits a foul-smelling gray energy. A bone devil, says Linny, a devil commonly employed as a torturer by devil lords. She also recalls that they possess powerful spell abilities that make them masters of battlefield control. Instead of attacking them, however, the bone devil beckons. "Ah, you have arrived. Do come in. You have nothing to fear. I have no intention of hurting you, yet. I was wondering if you could do a favor for me." Holden shoves his way to the front of the line. "What do ye want?" In the room at the other end of the complex is a nuisance that needs to be dealt with. You will find trapped inside a Kyber dragon's heart a demon named Shabrirav. I want you to slay it. The party is silent. In exchange I am going to supply you with all the information you need to defeat Azarkul's plans. They look at each other and eye the Baitja warily. You might be asking why I don't go and deal with it myself. The damaged dragon's hard prison is going to suck me in. I would rather not be trapped in a prison with an enemy of mine for all eternity. The party excuses themselves and deliberates on what to do. Nox is wary of the plans, but Holden and Leica agree that stopping the Red Hand cult is the primary goal right now and that if disposing of a demon is going to help them, getting through to the end will be much easier. Kikini agrees as well, thinking that going blind into the lower fane is suicidal. Holden goes up to Taralanix and asks him what guarantee they have of his word, and the devil offers to draw up a contract signed in blood. Ultimately, Holden says that he has more in common with a lawful devil than a chaotic demon, and they negotiate on terms. Holden wants Taralanix to avoid attacking them, but Taralanix stipulates that neither of them is allowed to harm or in any way hinder the other party, and that any hostile actions will automatically void the contract. If the party brings Taralanix the skull of Shabrirav, then he will show them the quickest route through the rest of the fane and give them detailed information on what awaits them later. After a last-minute debate, Holden signs the contract. As a show of good faith, Taralanix informs them that Shabrirav is a Glabrezu fiend of about his level in terms of power. He tells them that Glabrezu are masters of subversion and corruption, but that they are equally as dangerous in physical and magical combat. The party arrives at Shabrirav's prison. At once the demon senses their presence and asks them if they've considered his offer. Holden bluffs, saying that they've decided to set him free, but the demon merely says that Holden's a very bad liar. Holden and Leica take their positions beside the dais the shard is on, while Linny, Kikini and Nox stand apart close to the doorway. Holden shatters the prison, and the PCs are surprised to realize just how big Shabrirav is. The exploding shard knocks Holden and Laika off the dais as the others look on. "You're going to regret this. I shall feast on your innards." Laika immediately pushes her way into the demon's space, as he snugly fits the dais, and jumps over the demon, attempting to cleave him with her sword. Vonnegan cleaves into demonic flesh, but the fiend is still more than capable. Kikini picks up the head of the shattered behemoth statue with her telekinetic thrust and flings it at Shabrirav's head. He almost bats it away with his pincer, but Kikini is able to spin it just enough to send it crashing home. Before Holden is able to hit with his own attack, though, his slow speed is once more his downfall, Shabrirav sends Kikini spiraling into the ceiling with reverse gravity. She immediately activates her catfall power, preventing herself from being smashed into a gory paste on the ceiling. Linny fires off a sound lance, but fails to penetrate the fiend's metaphysical defenses. Kikini greases the spot underneath Shabrirav's feet, sending the demon sprawling. The two warriors try to attack, but Laika misses her swing, and before Holden can do anything, Shabrirav also blasts them with reverse gravity, then gets back up on his feet. Unable to hold on to anything, the two warriors fall 70 feet up into the carved stone ceiling. Holden's boots of landing help him land gingerly upside down on the ceiling, albeit still taking some damage, while Laika gets smashed pretty badly. Linny posits that if they leave the gravity field, they'd be able to get back into regular gravity. She then begins casting her favorite fiend buster spell, Light of Venya. Laika leaps out of the field, tumbling to reduce her falling damage and to avoid Shabrirav's AOO, but she fails her last check. The demon plucks her right out of the air with his pincer, and she takes damage from the sudden stop to boot. He then begins to crush the life out of Laika. Holden tries to find a way to get down, but due to his weight with the new maul, Kikini could no longer afford the PP cost to fling him. Nox finally takes his shot against the still flat-footed fiend, and just before Shabrirav snaps Laika like a twig, Linny vaporizes the fiend's physical form with her Light of Venya. Shabrirav's skull falls onto the ground with a heavy thud as the rest crumbles to dust. Holden and Kikini are then dumped unceremoniously to the floor. After some healing, they drag the fiend's head back to Taralanix. After the Beiju torturer sees proof of his Tanarari rival's demise, Taralanix fulfills his end of the bargain. He explains that one of the cells in his lair has a secret passage that leads straight to the lower fane. The first area they will arrive in is the Great Hall that Azarkul holds worship ceremonies in honor of Tyomat. He notes that Azarkul's pet abyssal drake is kept here, along with its Metzoloth handlers. A secret door from there leads on into the great cavern that was once the home of the ancient bronze dragon that once guarded this fane. Its children, too young to know the original purpose of the complex, were easily slain by the Red Hand cultists and their dragons as they invaded. Now the cavern is home to the greatest of Azarkul's dragon spawn. Even deeper in is the outer sanctum, heavily guarded and populated by cultists who are supporting Azarkul's main ritual. A secret door here would lead to Azarkul's private quarters and his treasury. The PCs will find Azarkul and his planar orrery in the inner sanctum. The fiend asks the PCs if they have any more questions, and simply vanishes, telling them it was a pleasure doing business with them. The Great Temple of Tyomat. The PCs take the secret passageway and enter the cavernous temple. Before they're able to make any preparations, they notice that everything was indeed as Taralanix had said. Two Metzoloths were standing in the alcoves at the far end of the room, and in the largest alcove, behind the altar, was an enormous, black-scaled wyvern with fiery red eyes. The abyssal drake stirs and takes to the air. Four heavyset, eyeless dog-like creatures encased in armor canoliths lunge straight for the PCs. Almost immediately one of the Metzoloths drops a cloud kill on the PCs, and the Canoloths make a beeline for them. Although the Canoloths have blind sight, the foul-smelling cloud kill vapors prevent them from fighting at their full ability. The drake flies overhead and blasts everyone with its unholy fire breath, but Kikini manages to activate her intellect fortress and helps the party avoid being crisped. The blast, however, incinerates one of the Canoloths. The PCs try to get out of the cloud kill as fast as they can, while the Canoloths pursue. The other Metzoloth uses its produce flame ability to continuously bombard the PCs with thrown flaming projectiles. Kikini, wanting to avoid any more trouble from the drake, attempts something. She extends the full force of her Shinic power and fires off a psychic crush on the abyssal drake, which fails its save. The massive beast crumples onto the wooden pews, splintering them as it falls. Hardened by the drake's demise, the rest of the party continues to fight the Kinoloths. The Yugoloth attack dogs aren't able to do much against the PCs, though Leica and Linny do get snagged by their adhesive tongues. Nobody fails the paralysis saves, however. Kikini and Nox take cover in the double doorway. The sniper taunts one of the Metzoloths into attacking him. The fiend teleports right behind the two of them and begins lunging at Nox with its trident. Nox draws a bane dagger from his gauntlet of infinite blades and feints. The Metzoloth falls for it, and the rogue shanks the fiend. Leica and Holden take down the last of the Kinoloths as Kikini attempts to distance herself from the Metzoloth that just teleported behind them. The other Metzoloth, still on the alcove, continues to bombard the PCs with its thrown projectiles. Leica and Nox decide to take down the injured Metzoloth quickly, while Kikini throws Holden at the flame-producing Metzoloth. As the dwarf sails through the air, though, he notices that very close to the fiend's alcove is a secret door hidden in the wall. Nox sneaks his Metzoloth, killing it, and Kikini throws Leica at the last one. The two silver flamers take down the last fiend. After this, I'm gonna need a vacation, Holden grumbles. In the Temple of Tyomat, the party debates about whether they should rest or not. For some reason they forget exactly what Taralanix says about the rest of the dungeon, despite Linny's player taking down notes. Thanks to JRPGs, he assumes that the big double doors that lead out of the worship chamber lead to the boss battle. Dizzy face. Thus, they check the secret door. To their surprise, it opens into inky darkness. The only sound is the vague whistling of wind from somewhere. Kikini brings out her dark light and reveals that they had just entered a vast, vaulted cavern even larger than the temple chamber. It soars to over 175 feet high, but the interior is uneven. Halfway across the chamber from them is a vast cliff that goes up at least 150 feet, and a rickety scaffolding supports what looks like a hastily built staircase. Uneasy about exploring the rest of the cavern, Holden mentions they should rest first. Kikini wants to check the other door. Wanting to scout before they retreat, Nox drinks his potion of invisibility, but since going up will take over a minute, he asks for a Shanic fly from Kikini's staff instead. He heads up on his own. As he goes up, he notices that an enormous network of webbing is anchored to the scaffolding and is on level with the top of the cliff. He picks out a campfire from his survival pouch once more and sets fire to the web, which begins burning rapidly. Soon after, he hears a piercing, chittering shriek in the sound of a very long, large sword being drawn. "I told you we should have gone to sleep first," whispers Holden. "Dibs on the sword," Leica replies. However, Holden tells Leica that they have to go up, but she refuses. "Sir, I believe this qualifies as sending a subordinate to her death. When we get back to Thrain, I am so filing a complaint." As the web barrier burns away, Nox spots the monsters above, a monstrous, black spider the size of a full-grown bull, with a distorted, draconic head and distinctive forward-curving horns, a black spawn gloomweaver. The other creature worries everyone, a 20-foot-tall, muscle-bound humanoid figure wielding a gigantic bastard sword that crackles with electricity. "It's a blue spawn god's lair," says Linny. Holden and Leica fly up slowly, halfway up between Nox and the ground. Nox tells the others to stay low while he tries to snipe the god's lair. He's confident that the monsters can't reach far enough to attack him, so he goes up alone and takes the shot. He scores a solid hit on the god's lair, but the brute simply yanks out the bolt in its chest and horror of horrors runs toward him and jumps a solid 40 feet across empty space towards Nox. It makes a touch attack, grabbing him right out of the air, and they fall to the floor 150 feet below. Nox lands on the cave floor with a sickening crunch, at 1 HP. The god's lair, damaged by the fall, sets its sights on Linny and Kikini, who are isolated on the cave floor. Holden and Leica look at each other, wondering why this is even happening, as the party had agreed that they didn't want to go up. Leica sees the blade, however, and says, "Dibs on the blade," once more. "But ya can't even wield it. It will look good on my roof." Linny fires off a sound lance, but rolls rather poorly and the beast saves against it. Kikini, attempting to end the encounter quickly, manifests death urge, but the god's lair shrugs it off. The Gloomweaver sprints across the cliff shelf and lands 10 feet away from Linny and Kikini. Holden and Leica charge the god's lair, but only Holden is able to deal any significant damage to the furious creature. Nox, still on the ground, realizes that any movements he make will be met with a massive, electrically charged sword to the face, so he delays his turn. The god's lair angrily roars, drops its shield, and swings its sword in an enormous arc across Holden and Leica, dealing enormous damage to both of them. Leica decides it's time to end this, and cuts it in half with Soaring Raptor Strike. The Gloomweaver charges and gores Linny with its horns, but the two tanks come in and take it down quickly. The party decides they've had enough for the day, and make a break for their resting place outside the fane. Leica and Nox finally level up to 12. Leica takes her last level in Warblade, picks Stormguard Warrior as her LV 12 feet and takes the maneuver Rabid Bear Strike, while Nox takes 1 level of Swordsage. Day 53. 7th Ron 998 YK. It's dangerously close to the secret time limit that I've set, Day 55, but the PCs, and the players, are determined to finish this once and for all. They've gotten this far. They enter the fane a third time and find that it is eerily empty. The remaining clerics and personnel have all boarded themselves up within the outer sanctum, and are all functioning off lesser restoration spells to avoid the effects of fatigue. The ritual must be completed. The PCs reach the large cavern without any resistance, and begin climbing up. Nox goes up the stairs first, and sees the bright light spilling out of the carved hallway at the upper end of the cavern. The party manages to sneak close to the entrance of the outer sanctum without being heard. Even Holden manages to roll high. The two frontliners take up positions on either side of the sanctum, while Linny, Nox and Kikini position themselves as far as they could from the entrance of the hallway, outside the darkness. The light clearly illuminates 7 figures inside. In a circular room stand 5 Hobgoblin Clerics, wearing the relatively simple outfits that the low-level clerics the party had been fighting since the start war. They have their hands outstretched upwards, and the Tyomat heads in the dais they stand on spew multicolored energy into the ceiling above. 2 larger hobgoblins stand closer to the hallway, one in ornate robes and a breastplate, the other in full plate wielding a great sword. Nox decides to open up with the trinket he pulled off Karn's corpse, the Dhakani siege diadem. An enormous fireball lights up the interior of the cul-de-sac at the end of the hallway, and the 5 clerics die instantly. Seemingly unaffected, the figure in robes turns around, and its form changes. It grows to at least 12 feet tall, its burly arms swelling with muscle. Its head morphs into the black-furred, tiger-like head of an Atian Rakshasa, but instead of orange stripes it has twisted, bronze-colored stripes fashioned like dragon marks. 6 horns jut out of its head and jaws, and a pair of bronze-colored wings extends from its back. In its hands, it holds an enormous chain of black metal that looks like it could be used to tether an elephant. Linny recalls that as Tyomat is a demon overlord, she is served by her own cadre of Rakshasa agents. Particularly skilled and successful Rakshasa are given the chance to undergo a ritual that bestows upon them the power of dragons. This one is probably the ringleader of the Rakshasa cell. I've been waiting. It's time for you to die. Kikini blasts the greatsword-wielding crusader and the Rakshasa with a fiery energy line, badly scorching the already injured crusader. However, the Rakshasa is completely unscathed by this as well. Nox takes a shot against the still flat-footed crusader, severely injuring him, but the crusader breaks the bolt in his chest and gets back up, declaring that he would serve Indravan until his death. Linny casts Sound Lance on the crusader, killing him. Nox uses a wand of sniper's shot and readies to snipe the Rakshasa, while Kikini blasts it one more time, again to no effect. Leica readies to attack anything that gets into her range, while Holden decides to charge in. The Rakshasa swings at him with his spiked chain, bashing Holden as he comes in, but the crusader isn't stopped. He rolls an impressive 35 on his attack roll, and he thinks his blow strikes home, but the Rakshasa simply snaps his chain tight and stops Holden's maul dead cold. At this point the party is shocked that such a high roll didn't make the target's AC. The Rakshasa holds up a fist, and a ring on his finger glows with fell power. A pair of large greatswords each over 9 feet long unsheath themselves from the scabbards on the Rakshasa's back. I am Indravan Yugna, the avatar of rage. The 2 greatswords burst into flames. Indravan sprints for the cavern, and while Holden swings at him thanks to thicket of blades, he misses badly. Just as Indravan is about to pass Leica, who is still hidden at the lip of the hallway, the Rakshasa Lord vanishes in a cloud of shadowy motes and reappears right in front of Nox, Linny and Kikini, practically pinning them against the cavern wall. Imagine looking up at a 12-foot-tall, 800-pound, muscle-bound tiger dragon fiend wielding a spiked chain made of the hardest metal in existence, with 2 flaming bits of metal taller than you hovering around him. The players realize just then that this encounter isn't going to be easy.